don't know what's going on here. Okay, it is started. It's recording.
Great. So Kelly, is this everybody? Do you think we're expecting anybody else?
No, I think this is everybody that I'm aware of.
All right, well, let's get started then. Thanks everyone for coming. I know it's hard to find time in August on a sunny, again, Tuesday afternoon, but it's really nice to have you all here. And I see there's some folks on the phone as well. So as you know, this is for the Sandy Transportation System Plan update, and you are part of the Community Advisory Committee, and this is our meeting number 2. I assume you all got the agenda and a packet of some materials that Kelly sent out yesterday. Apologies that you didn't get it a little further in advance, but I also have found that most people don't really dive in and read everything before it. And we're not going over anything too complicated today, and I'll make sure we do go over everything. So if you haven't done your homework and you didn't have time, there'll be plenty of chance today to go through everything and make sure that everyone gets a chance to contribute. So let's see, the first thing on the agenda is really recapping our first meeting that we had back in April. I know it's been a while, so I just wanted to refresh everyone just really quick on that. So what we've done so far is we went through technical memo number 1, which was the policy framework and a code review. And if you were at that meeting, you will recall it was pretty long. It was a lot of planning work, but we went through, all of that framework that shapes where the transportation system plan update's going, what the state requires us to do, what the city would like us to do. There's lots of state documents and ODOT in the county. We have to really consider all of that as we move forward. So if you have any questions on that, please let me know, but we're gonna move forward from that memo into what we're gonna talk about today. Let's see. So I wanted to give you a little more of an update on what we've been doing since we've talked in April. So we have been pretty busy both preparing the 2 draft memos that you guys got today, but also working in, I don't know what's the word, concurrently with the TSP updates is working on the bypass feasibility study. And that is now wrapping up, but I wanted to at least give you guys some updates and some highlights on that because it definitely will be something that we'll be talking about as we're updating the TSP. So as you know, the current transportation plan has a project for the US 26 bypass going south of the city. It is not what we call a fully funded project in the TSP. It's more of an aspirational project. It's supported and it's in the adopted plan, but there's no funding source identified for it. You're probably not surprised to hear that. It's very expensive. So what we were tasked with, because it's been almost 10 years since that study was done, we took kind of a fresh look at the bypass and determining if it would be feasible to keep it as a TSP project and have it move forward. So we dug into quite a few details. We conducted a benefit cost analysis for it, looking not only at the transportation and traffic operation pieces like we normally would, right? Looking at how intersections operate, looking at future conditions, looking at travel times through the city, both with and without the bypass. But we also expanded some of the measures that we wanted to look at. So we had an economic development firm on our team, and they did some research on, what some high level things that we could expect of having a bypass, what are the economic either benefits or impacts from that, because there are some good and bad that come with that. And then we also looked at some regulation and policy implications that come with a bypass. Just knowing there's lots of state planning rules about how a bypass works. The alignment goes outside the Sandy urban growth boundary, which in itself would require an exception, and quite a few other regulations get triggered. So just some things that we have to consider with the project. And then we also had a civil engineering roadway design firm as a sub-consultant, and they took a little closer look at what the alignment could be. It's still very high level, very 10% conceptual design. but we wanted to make sure that the alignment was at least feasible, with consideration for creeks and grades and property lines and, connections with other roadways in the future. So we did go through that work, and then based on the alignment, they put together kind of like a high level planning cost estimate. So we really know what we're talking about, right? Because funding this is, one of the biggest hurdles that we're going to have. So right now we have a document that's in draft form. It documents all that work that I just talked about, the cost estimates, the layouts, and all those other considerations. And it puts together all the benefits, all the costs, with some recommendations on where we want to go with the bypass. And right now that is still being reviewed by the bosses of the bosses, I would say. So the city needs to, Kelly's read it and others, but Kelly needs to, run it up the flagpole, as they say, a little bit and get some input. And then the county hasn't had a chance to look at it yet. Seth at ODOT needs to float it to a couple more people too, just to make sure that we're really putting together a thoughtful document that looks at everything and considers everything that we'll need to when we make a decision about that project. DLCD at the state also needs to look at it. The county, if I didn't say that, there's quite a few groups that need to have their input. So I will say we're hoping to have that final review done. I'm hoping within a month. I have some edits that I need to do, and then that group will probably give them a couple of weeks to look at it. So once that document is finalized, Kelly will make sure that he sends it out to this group so that you guys get a chance to see it as well. And we can start talking about it in our next CAC meeting when we start talking about what some of the potential projects and solutions for the future conditions can be. So sorry, I just talked a bunch. Does anybody have any just questions about the background on this other bypass project that's been going on?
Lots of rumors around that particular product.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard something on the order of, was it $300 to $500 million to get the...
You want to know the sticker? So what we did decide to do is we took everything and put it in 2040 dollars or in 2040 measures, just knowing that that would be by far the soonest that this project would ever happen. So right now it stands, I want to say it's like 950 to $1 billion when it's escalated up to 2040 dollars. And that's construction and some estimates with, right away. And of course, a ton of contingencies for design and the entire package, but that's where it is right now.
Different than the numbers I've been hearing, so.
Well, I would say, I think that maybe you heard the current dollar numbers.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah.
I just heard from a couple different people that are on that committee that have said that it's much cheaper than they thought it would be, but doesn't sound like.
No, that's not the impression I got, that it was much cheaper. Maybe like I said, initially without some contingencies and when it was in current dollars. I know, any other questions about the bypass?
Carl, to answer your question, the current dollars is around 400 million, but that would be if it was constructed right now, like September of 2021.
Sure.
And since there's no funding for it, there's no exceptions that have been granted. It hasn't even been adopted by anybody. There's no way it could be adopted in today's dollar or built in today's dollars. So,
yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, planning takes forever just to get through environmental review process and the regulatory hurdles and all of that. Even if we did have a check for $1 billion, I think it'd be 10 or 15 years. I think we can even get through all of it in the right-of-way negotiations and design. But of course, we don't have that money, so that really bumps us out to at least 2040 or beyond. So, any other questions? I know there's a lot here. I'm happy to answer anything you're thinking. No? Okay. Well, we can always go back to. So what we'll be doing going forward with the bypass is once everyone's reviewed it and we come up with a recommendation, it's really pretty simple. Our choices really are, it either remains a project with some community support in the TSP. I'm fairly certain that it will still be an unfunded project. I don't think we're going to be able to show that we have up to $1 billion to fund it. Or we find that we don't have support and it gets taken out as a transportation system plan project for 2040. So those are really the two outcomes that we can have. I don't know, Kelly or Seth, if that's too blunt, but I think those are really there are two options.
Yeah, and I guess I would just clarify that that study itself, I don't know if it'll have any direct recommendations, because I think that will kind of come out of the TSP
That's true.
discussion.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's a good clarification. It's really to inform this group and the public and other decision makers, planning commission and city council is ultimately who's going to adopt the TSP. This is some supplemental information, particularly about this one very, significant project to help them decide if it stays or goes as a project. Okay, well, I'll keep moving. I thought you guys might have more questions. So the first item in your packet was technical memo number 2, which is the project goals, objectives, and evaluation criteria. And that is just a big, long way of saying these are what we use as guidelines and how we develop all the different types of projects and programs that would be recommended in the TSP update. So the process that we went through was we started with the current 2011 TSP goals. We also went and took a look at the newly updated transit master plan and grabbed those for transit. And then we also looked at some other more recent TSPs that have been done in cities across the state to include some more, some more modern transportation planning ways of thinking, things that are, a lot of things that have come up like equity and things like that, 10 years ago either weren't included or they were, very lightly included. So with all of that, we worked with Seth and Kelly and we had come up with these. And again, they are suggested or draft goals and policies and objectives. So I'd love to get some feedback from you guys today on these. Do these feel right? Or are there things completely missing? Or is there just some wordsmithing on some of these? You think maybe the language is too light or too heavy? And then to let you know, once we get these past you guys, we will use them when we come up with our giant list of potential projects. And we will actually go through and measure how each solution, and say it's a sidewalk infill project on a certain road at a certain location or a roadway extension. We will compare these to all of these objectives and say either yes, it helps fulfill it, or it's neutral, it does nothing, or no, it does not support it. And then we go through all the projects and it's a big Excel spreadsheet. And then that helps us determine which projects are fulfilling or doing the best job meeting these goals, objectives, and which ones are not. And then we come back with a prioritized list. And that is just the first step. There's always lots of tweaking once we get more community buy-off or input from you guys and from staff too. Some projects will, bump up or bump down depending on it. But it gives us a nice initial look at what's most important and what's not, and really what to spend money on and what we can't afford to spend money on. Because honestly, we're still working on the financial forecast for all of our projects right now. But like your current TSP in most cities, you really only can afford to pay for maybe 20 or 30% of all of your projects. So a lot of times it's really important to know what's a high priority. Those typically can be funded. Some of the medium priorities can get funded. And everything else just goes on an aspirational list because money is so tight and it's so hard. So that's really where we're going. So I want to make sure as we go through these, they're meaningful to you and that they're meaningful to what you think your community is looking for from their transportation plan, so that when we do go through those prioritization, the right projects reach the top. So any questions on that so far?
About the only thing I can think of when I went through those goals is that the highway bypass is such an influence on the city. I mean, it's like a river of cars that run through the city, and there's all kinds of things that are impactful by it. And the decision to or not to makes a world of difference on some of these side roads. For example, just healthy living conditions with all the exhaust, all the fumes that come through the city because of the highway. You know, the side streets are pretty minimal compared to what's going on there. Safety is the same thing. We got people with transporting guns and drugs, as well as speeding and not being able to stop for mothers passing through. All that stuff is so overwhelmed some of the side street stuff that it's almost, I need to know, are we evaluating the city as if there was no Highway 26? Or do I evaluate all these things as if Highway 26 is the monster in the room?
Well, what I would say is we would be evaluating each project individually against all of these goals. So, and the bypass in itself is one of those solutions, right? That gets measured against all of these. So yeah, it's hard to say, you know, is there reality with or without it? But there could, I'm trying to think, there could be some projects like pedestrian crossing projects. And what I hear you saying is like with the bypass, maybe those aren't as high a priority to have some pedestrian crossing projects on the highway because the bypass has taken so much traffic volume away. Yeah, go ahead, Seth. Seth raised his hand.
Well, then I think this relates to what you were saying earlier, Ria, that, you know, even if this were funded now, it would take quite some time before it were constructed, and the planning horizon is 20 years. So I think for this exercise, we generally have to assume it's not going to be there within that 20-year period. So while that may be the aspiration, that it may stay in the plan, I think the most kind of conservative thing to do would be to plan for what do you need in that intervening time frame to make sure that you have a safe and efficient transportation system, at least to the extent that you can. And then at whatever point the bypass comes through, then that changes the discussion, certainly. But we just can't make that assumption at this point.
Well, for example, one of the things that I've been an advocate of is that with 40 some odd thousand cars a day going through the city, those coming from Sandy Grade to the high school kids, I would be a strong advocate for underground access underneath the highway to get to the library. But if the Highway 26 isn't in play, then that becomes a lot lower priority for me. So, it's almost like as if I really have no reference point about what kind of things should be the highest priority. And certainly school children getting to their schools is critical for me and highest in my mind, keeping our kids safe. But so much of that is associated with Highway 26.
Yeah, and Seth, I really appreciate your comment. I do think that's a good way to look at it. I mean, yeah, I don't know how quickly we could even get the bypass. It would probably at least 20 years out. And I would hate for us to just say all our eggs are in that basket, that's going to fix it. And then we don't do anything the next 20 years because we're assuming eventually like the volumes will come down. But what happens to kids? That's a whole generation of kids, right? Crossing the street, waiting for us to get our money together to maybe build that. And even if we said 2040 today, nothing ever happens in the government as quickly as we would think. So I do appreciate that comment, Seth. I think that's a really smart way to look at it. But I would also add our forecasting with the bypass still takes less than half of the traffic off of US 26. At least that's what we're estimating, just based on how many trips on the highway either start or stop in Sandy today versus how many people are completely cutting through town. So even with the bypass, US 26, with 20 plus years of growth, will likely have the same traffic it has today, if that makes sense. Because, right, we have 20 years of growth and then say 50% of it goes to the bypass. A lot of it, because it's still the main arterial for Sandy, it'll have a lot of traffic volume on it. Okay, Kelly raised his hand.
Yeah, I was going to say some of the safety goals, some of the objectives within Goal 7, I believe, kind of hit upon some of those concerns that Carl was just raising. Objective 7.5 says provide enhanced pedestrian and bicyclist crossings where needed. And I think objective 7.3, when we're looking at programmed transportation facility improvements, I think is a really important one as far as what Carl was just saying, because that actually says provide safe pedestrian and bicycle routes between residential areas, schools, and public facilities, which hits schools, libraries, and their houses. So I think some of these objectives are very important to keep in mind on the safety side when we're looking at transportation facility improvements, especially if we're concerned about children crossing the state highway system.
Yeah, and just the way that would play out, Kelly, is because there is a goal or an objective just for, the school, neighborhood, community piece, every project, say sidewalk infill or crossing piece that fulfills, they get ranked a little bit higher just because they meet it and all the other ones don't. So that it's kind of cumulative. So the more goals that you can show each individual project is meeting, they get more points and they come up to the top of the project list.
So like Carl was, I guess my only other point on that is, as Carl was saying, the crossing at the library, still, we were looking into it 2 or 3 years ago and we still have not fixed that issue. To me, that is the #1 pedestrian safety priority in the city of Sandy. So, and I think that will be identified through looking at these objectives and saying how many of them hit, how many of those objectives will be fulfilled once that transportation facility is changed for pedestrians.
Yeah, and I also would add too, just your local knowledge, Kelly, that you just added will also be influential on the project list. Like I said, these are just used as an initial pass because we could have hundreds of projects. So we go through this and then we take local knowledge and we take community input and input from you guys and help us shape it too, so we don't miss anything. So it's not super black and white, but it's just that first step. So are there any specific goals that you guys wanted to change the wording of, or things that you wanted to add? And we don't have to go all through it today either. If you don't want a discussion, you are more than welcome to just mark it up and send it to Kelly too, and I can take a look at it if you think that's easier. If you don't want to go, word for word today, I'm also happy with that. But if there's anything you guys wanted to discuss or debate, I think that would be good.
I don't want to be the taker-upper of all the time here, but I do have another concern and how that would fit in with the project. Personally, I would like to have it printed out, mark it all up, and then send it off to Kelly. That would be my best. But I'm also thinking about projects that the city itself is putting together and maybe put together, and how that influences some of these different projects. Of 362nd Highway 26 to Bell Street. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. It's one of those highest priority street improvements that the city has gone forward on and is pushing it. That's going to make some differences in how people access the Highway 26, how we look at emergency services to the south end of the Sandy, and all those sorts of things. So how would other road and transportation projects that the city has in, or the county has in this plan, whether they're for sure or just on the plan with no real funding, how does those influence our priority for goals?
Well, they shouldn't too much. Like I said, we will look at every project kind of individually, but you're right, there is a cumulative piece. Right now, you do have an adopted TSP that tells us which projects are on the financially constrained list, which means we feel comfortable that they would be built within, that future horizon year. So if we needed to, and we thought that we have to look at a cumulative, those projects, you would look at that list. That's kind of our status right now of where we think things are going. Does that help answer your question?
To some degree. For example, 362nd may be a mute detail because it's pretty much in the hopper. Mm-hmm. But Highway 211 out to Arletha Court, and well, now it's out to the Bailey Meadows. That's pretty new. I don't think it's in the old TSP, and I think that certainly has some higher priorities than maybe some of the other projects that are on the current TSP list. So those are the kind of things I'm thinking of is where do we stand? And maybe there are some changes in that current TSP that gives me a little different feel. Certainly I can evaluate the goals based on my knowledge, but does the whole team have that in their head?
Yeah, well, so when next time we meet, just so you know, we will have a draft list of projects that we have already gone through all the goals, objectives, right? And we'll have an initial either low, medium, or high priority set for them. And you guys will get to react to that. And I think that's a really good time, Carl, and then you can bring all of your local knowledge and go, oh, well, why is this one median? I know it's really important. It connects to a school, or I think it's going to happen because, you know, the developer's been in for pre-apps and we know they're pretty serious about, you know, this road. There's just a lot of local input that goes into shaping not only the projects, but then the priorities as well. So, and I know in the next round, though, that's really the meat of it all. And when we get into those details.
Okay.
Anybody else? Oh, Karen, raise your hand.
Hi, thanks. I'm Karen Bureg. I'm the long-range planning manager at Clackamas County. And one thing that I just wanted to say that we had done in Clackamas County is that we had made some objectives related to health. And that's just something that could be considered or not. But I didn't necessarily see it in the set of objectives. But I do know that there have been some concerns identified around health. So anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up.
That's a great comment. Some smaller cities do have health as one of their goals, and it's kind of all related, right? I mean, safety is health, but you can tie it back just to health specifically. Active transportation and is obviously, again, getting exercise and health. Traffic volumes and air pollution and the environmental piece also points right back to health. So if those are things that you guys feel are important, we definitely could, I don't want to say we're doubling up on all those other things that I just mentioned, but they get captured a little bit differently under the umbrella of health. And it does then promote those types of projects. So yeah, I don't know if that's something you guys are interested in.
I certainly am.
Okay.
The environmental issues about car exhausts and especially with 26, to some degree 211, make a big difference. I know walking down, my business is right on 20 the direction, and I can get outside my house and smell the diesel and the exhaust, and it's pretty rough sometimes.
Okay. Anybody else disagree? Because I'm happy to add health as an individual goal and find some. Oh, Linda, raise your hand. No, you're not really Linda. You do that every time to trick me. Oh, you're muted. Can you tell?
Dawn, you're muted.
I don't know, can he hear us?
Sorry about that. Out of practice. Anyway, as I was saying, I agree with what Councilor Exum was saying. I'd also like to see included or take a look at just the impacts of neighborhood livability as a result of traffic. You know, so many people, locals, know that when, 26 is backed up, you can jump onto DeBarco and bypass the whole thing. And there's a lot of speeding that goes on through that area. Becomes a little bit more dangerous, makes it a little bit harder for the side streets to get out or get into their homes and different things. There are also neighborhoods that, such as mine, that have new developments associated with it, where there's, for whatever reason, the streets haven't been opened up to exit the neighborhood from the new one, so it forces all the new houses to travel through our neighborhood to be able to get out. So I think that we need to take a look at not just the big streets, but also the little streets, because it's honestly, it's the little streets where we spend most of our time on. And it'd be a nice thing to be able to include that to make sure that our neighborhoods are staying not just safe, but also, frankly, livable. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I just wrote that all down. Okay. Any other thoughts? I know we have someone from Chamber of Commerce. I don't know if you had any comments about just economics or economic development or supporting. Any thoughts on that with related to transportation?
Goodness. You know, for a lot of our businesses, you know, a lot of them are concerned about a bypass. They feel like that could ruin their business. And then there's others who feel they'll be able to get people to stop more easily. So it's kind of a mixed bag on some of that. I know they're frustrated with the traffic through town, but they also want the ease of being able to come in. One of the examples I look at, Ben's bypass was fantastic for their new area, their downtown area, and that I forget exactly what they call all that, but their original, where the highway came through, I actually lived off that road, you know, 26, 27 years ago, going to college over there. And you go through there now and it looks awful. And those businesses that were there aren't there anymore. You know, it doesn't have the same feel as the other side of Bend. So the bypass does, you know, as a Chamber of Commerce, worries me for our businesses too. So I see both sides and I get both sides from it, but you know, there is that consideration in there too.
Yeah, and I would point out, I think Sandy's is a little bit different just because the way where the city limits is and the earth growth boundary and the zoning, if the bypass were to be constructed, there wouldn't be any development or along it. So it would be taking customers away, but it wouldn't necessarily set up a new, like, you know, commercial area that would then compete with downtown, you know, where everyone would just relocate and rent space somewhere else. That wouldn't be an opportunity.
Right. And I definitely agree with that. I just know going through other areas, you know, too, you know, there's things I want to stop at. My husband's like, no, we're taking the easy, quick way, you know, or I'm not seeing what's new going on unless I specifically take that random route through somebody's downtown when they do have a bypass.
Yeah.
So I don't know if, you know, if the passer-throughs are going to know what we have to offer in our downtown area.
Yeah, that's a very good point. All right, good. Anyone else? Oh, Carl, go ahead.
Hate to be the talker here, but one of the things that I've been aware of in the last few years is our safety, under the safety issue of access from one part of the city to the other. And this has to do with emergency vehicles and how we move from one side to the other. For example, Bluff Road has always been a real big concern of mine on the early morning when all the traffic goes to the new high school, and then the afternoon when everybody's leaving the high school. And it just seems like Bluff has been one of those plugs that if we do get an emergency, it's tough to get through there, which the 362nd from 362nd from 26 to Bell will help out considerably. But there are other places in the city that it's difficult time-wise to go from one section to the other. And I guess I'd like to see, I don't see this in the goals that we have, how we permit our emergency vehicles, that's fire, police, and medical, all those things. And also, this happened, really come true to me last year, was when the fires happened, how people move from one part of the city to another to be able to escape fires. You know, they tell me the earthquake is coming. So alternate paths from one side of the city to the other in a manner that stays open. I don't know how you would state that in a succinct goal, but for me, certainly the emergency vehicles, I really want them to be able to get to fires, heart attacks, those kind of things quickly as possible, but also public movements from one side of the city to the other if there are some big crises like fires, like earthquakes, those kind of things. I didn't see that in the goals.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. We definitely could add a goal about does the project, you know, improve emergency service response times? you know, and support them, you know, during an event. That's something I've seen before. And we could also put some sort of language about, does it support evacuation routes, which I don't think the city has those designated per se, but we could write that somehow. I mean, we want all collectors and arterials to be able to be moving. So like you said, so people can, if it helps fill in a gap so people can get across the town from one side to the other, because you don't know like where the event could be, right? It could be a fire at the high school, or it could be, I mean, it's a little hard. It has to be general enough, but we could definitely, weave that in and make sure it's included.
I had this brought to me. It's a little bit different, but it's in the same venue. One of the other commissioners, who's a firefighter, said that there have been a couple of places now that ODOT is creating all these Audis, I guess you call them. I'm not sure what the technical term is for the ADA process. Some of our side streets in downtown Sandy have become very narrowly accessible to turn. And if there is a car parked in the wrong spot, can't negotiate with their fire trucks through those turns. And so some of those kind of things we surely should be looking at. Didn't realize it when it came through City Council's approval for that, but now that we actually see the things happening. So certainly we want to make sure we have not just downtown Sandy, but some of our narrow alleyways and such that are needing to be used for emergency transport. Those are also available. I know that goes through the Kelly's planning department, but things happen after the planning is done sometimes.
Yeah, there's pluses and minuses to narrow streets. The major plus is that emergency services and transit and garbage and recycling can more easily maneuver through the streets. The big negatives are that you need more stormwater. There's a longer travel time for pedestrians to cross the road, so there's more likelihood that they actually get hit by a moving vehicle. And then the other big thing is higher maintenance costs the more asphalt we have on streets. So there's definitely there's a balancing act between having enough width but not going too wide.
Yeah, and I would also add wider streets just encourages speeding, which I know we don't want, you know, when we have people out walking. Narrower streets it's pretty compelling, the data on what a 10-foot lane does to your driving habits versus 12 and more. So yeah, it's just a big balancing act of those design standards that you guys apply in different areas and what they're doing.
Right. And I don't want to see a speed bump on every one of our roads either. So I know that.
No,
you guys. Car.
We will be looking at your traffic calming standards, but no, yeah.
Okay.
Not the intent. All right, great comments. Anything else anybody want to add? No? Okay. So if you choose to, please feel free to mark it up and send it to Kelly, and then Kelly can route it to me, and we can go through everyone's comments and see what we can do to accommodate those. And then you guys will get a revised version of this to take a look at before next time. Okay. And then I'll incorporate all the comments that I heard today as well. So if
what's your timeline? What's your timeline on that?
Oh, I don't know how much time you guys want. I mean, this isn't really going to slow down our process. So a couple weeks. I don't know, it's 2 weeks good. I know if I give you more time, you'll take it. That's how most people work, but I'd say 2 weeks.
Okay.
Okay. All right. That sounds great. Let's keep moving. We're about 45 minutes into the meeting. So the second material in your packet was memo number 4, which is a summary of the transportation existing conditions and the inventory that we conducted. And the memo steps through by modes. That's how it's organized. So first we did pedestrian, and then bicycle, transit, and then motor vehicle. And that's typically how we organize the transportation system plan. There's a chapter for each one, like there is today, and we'll keep that organization. But knowing that a lot of the modes do influence each other, right? I mean, so knowing in the current TSP, if there's a new roadway project, we always assume that it would be built to, you know, if it's on a collector or a local street or an arterial, and that it would have those other modes included, right? I mean, all new roads get sidewalks. That's just your standard. And then some classifications of roads get bike lanes and other things as well. So you could see that pedestrian section's really focused on crosswalks, sidewalks, just in general, what the environment is for walking today. So I think we should just step through the meeting and maybe we'll just focus on one mode at a time. If that works for you guys, but of course we can jump around too. But so with that first piece, yeah, there's just a description of the pedestrian network. And this is pretty high level, but we did talk a little bit about where sidewalks are, you know, how they're working, also the paths and the trails. And I will add, we are coordinating with the very recent Parks and Trails Master Plan.
Oh, good.
That was adopted as well. Yeah, and the consultant that did that has shared their data with us as well. So all the recommended projects from that will be folded in with what we're doing. So when you start seeing some of our future projects and future ideas on maps, all of that'll be there because, you know, we do want to make sure we know where trails are. So we're connecting our street system to work with them in a coordinated way. So yeah, we will be doing that as well. Let's see. So yeah, we talked about trails, and then there's a little bit of description about the street crossings. And then figure 1 just shows a highlight of where things are and aren't today. And we really use this to highlight, you know, where are the deficiencies in the pedestrian system. And I think those are pretty straightforward, right? Sidewalk gaps, that's a deficiency. We typically look at arterial and collector sidewalk gaps as a higher priority than a local street just because of the volumes in the environment. And then looking at where there are marked pedestrian crossings, there are quite a few, you know, either with a traffic signal or just its own pedestrian crossing on the highway and a couple other places. But we will be looking at, you know, where are there gaps as well. Go ahead, Carl.
Did you consider some of the financing availability on some of these crossings? I know in the past we've had low income grants, and we've had other kinds of financial helps to make sure we can get our sidewalks and our crossings in. Have you considered some of that?
Well,
Or is it
actually,
just
we're
a matter
right.
of priority?
Well, no, we will. So we're right in the middle of it right now. We just got the historic financial data for transportation from the city. And then in the next meeting, you guys will get a packet. What we do is we look at the last 7 years of everything that you guys have spent, and then what it's also cost. And then we take that and we estimate how much is going to be available through the year 2040 for projects. And basically, that's our shopping money and how we can decide how to spend it. But it does include grants in the past. And I think we assumed maybe the city would win $250,000 of grants through 2040. I mean, we just had to make an estimate. Since you guys have won some in the past, and, you know, system development charges, all of the things that you guys bring money in for, you'll see it, but we've brought it all together and made an estimate. Go ahead, Kelly.
I was just going to say, I think Carl is mainly referring to the CDGB grant funds.
Oh, okay.
We were just awarded one about 4 years ago, and then we were just awarded one for ADA doors in some of our public buildings here this biennium. But I do believe Meinig Road, which is designated on here, and it doesn't show many sidewalks. I do believe that's in the CDGB low, I think, what do they call it, like lower income neighborhood area. So I think that would actually qualify for funding.
Yeah. If you have a lot of funding and we have a fairly high need, it seems like it might even raise that priority up if it's fairly high, but there's a real low chance of being able to get financing for it. You know, why spend your energy on it? Maybe there's some other ways we can look at it, but never want to ignore safety, I think, in terms of need.
No, agreed. And one of the things we will also put in that project list is the likelihood of funding. That is something that we also consider as well. Because yeah, you're right. I'm hoping when the TSB gets adopted, I mean, a bunch of them hopefully will say they're already funded. We keep them in, but we already know there's grants and other things coming. All right, go ahead, Seth. You're next.
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize that this is great discussion, but for this memo in particular, this is just the existing conditions. And so we just want to make sure that we have what exists out on the ground. We're not missing anything. So we're looking at those kind of comments so we know where the gaps are as we're developing those project lists.
Yeah, thanks, Seth, for keeping us on topic. I like to talk about all things transportation and where we're going. But yeah, so the ultimate feedback, I'd love to have you guys today. I just want to make sure we have all the right deficiencies for all the modes. So if there's a sidewalk gap that you think we're missing, or in an area where we should be looking at a marked crosswalk because you know there's a historic issue there, or as we get to the other modes, if there's any sort of, just what are the issues? I want to make sure we know all the problems. And if you have suggestions for solutions for today's problems, I'd love to hear those too.
So this is a question for clarity for myself and for everybody else that's going to be reviewing this memo. When we're looking at sidewalk deficiencies, should we be, so if it's deficient right now, but there's a planned subdivision, or let's say multifamily housing apartment, and we know that it's occurring, so the sidewalks don't currently exist, but they have their construction plans in for review, would that be a sidewalk that is constructed, since it's going to be paved in like a month?
Well, I know this is, it gets weird, Kelly, but I think we're going to have to stick with the date when we did this in the summer, but please let me know, because as we move forward, we'll likely either let it drop off, or we'll just keep it as a project and show that it's already funded or it's under construction, right? We'll just keep track of it in the project table. And then as we get closer to adoption, if it's really done, we'll clean it up. I don't want you guys to adopt a TSP that already has outdated information, but I don't want to lose track of it either, right? Developers go out of business. I don't know. I'd rather not lose track of the project.
And I guess my point is we have several that are bonded already.
Right.
And so even though the sidewalks and the shared improvements aren't made, even if the developer goes under, their surety's already guaranteed that the sidewalk will be paid for. So I think it's as good as done in that way.
Well, we're only showing arterials and collectors. And I guess the flip side is it's hard for us to show until it's considered constructed and then added to the GIS database that shows those pieces, that those roads exist. Does that make sense? And if you guys have GIS drawn up for those, which I'm guessing you don't, you probably just have it in CAD, but we always could add it if you have it to provide.
Yeah, there's actually, just looking at the map right now, there's a lot on the arterials and collectors that are bonded right now currently.
Okay, well, mark the map so I know. And we'll keep track of those, because I don't want to waste time going through any prioritization or anything for those if those are already just funded. We'll just skip right by them. And then I do want to make sure we know they're coming though, because then maybe the next sidewalk gap beyond them becomes the priority, right? Maybe there's one piece left that gets you to the school, or I don't know exactly where you're talking about in the city, but it makes the other gap more manageable, right? They might be building half a project, so it brings the cost down of what's left too. So yeah, let's talk about it a little bit more. We'll make sure it's right. Okay, so anything else for walking? You guys have talked a little about kids and getting to school. I've already heard, feedback that that's going to be a priority around the library. Are there any other locations along the highway or any other of the arterials or just busy streets where you think a marked pedestrian crossing is worth looking at? Do any locations come to mind?
Okay. Sorry. One of the most, probably the second highest problem that I have looked at and watched for the last 12, 14 years I've been on council is that piece of road between Bornstead Turnoff and basically Highway 26, with kids coming down going for a Joe's Donut or a shopping or library or something. There's especially where it crosses Tickle Creek. To me, that's a huge priority there. So I've seen trucks within inches of kids on rainy days on a bicycle or on a skateboard. Just really tough to watch.
Okay.
Talking about priorities, that's sure high. I know it's high on the other counselors' list too.
Okay. Let's keep moving. We can always go back to walking, but I'm going to jump ahead then to the bicycle network. So we have a summary about where there's bike lanes, and there are quite a few facilities in town that do have designated bike lanes. And then if they don't, there's a lot that have what we call a shoulder bike lane. There's enough width for bicycles. They're not actually, marked or signed. And they're usually a little bit more narrow than the standard 6-foot bike lane. And then a lot of the other roads are, shared bike routes where the volume or speed is low enough for bikes just to share with vehicles. And then also there's bicycle paths around town as well. And we talked a little bit about the availability of bicycle parking and where that's at. And then we have the bike facilities mapped in figure 2. I did want to add, I know the one thing that's a problem is, you're muted if she's talking to us. I know downtown there's already a noted deficiency that people park in that very, very narrow parking strip, and your car is blocking the bike. So that's not right. It's a very constrained width downtown. I see that happen often driving through town. So that's something that we know about. I don't know how much you guys see bikers in town, but yeah, if you guys have thoughts, go ahead, Carl.
I noticed that you don't have 362nd from 26 to Bell. And when that's probably for sure going to be put in as a bike lane, that's probably for kids. It's going to come right in at the high school. I suspect that kids will want to get into that country up in Salmon River and that kind of development and those kind of places. So
this is just the existing bike lane, so Carl, not the.
Is that it? Oh, I thought this was.
No, this is
what it
just
should be.
existing. Yeah.
So we're not considering 362nd existing then.
Well, we will. So the next piece after this is the future conditions and deficiencies, and we'll start adding those projects in so we can see the network. So yeah, this is just today.
All right.
Oh, Karen waved. Karen had to go. So do you guys see any challenges with people biking through town?
Tilly.
Is it pleasant?
It's awful.
Terrible.
It's too hilly in a lot of places. So the only ones you really see are the hardcore biker, like the people that like have the whole suit on, the whole skin tight suit, or little kids. I mean, that's the majority of our bikers, unless I'm not seeing the other people. But people like me, that I'm not a kid and I'm not a serious biker, so there's not a lot of there's not a lot of adults that don't wear the bike gear around. I don't think biking. Not that I see, at least.
Do a lot of kids ride their bikes to school, or they walk more?
I don't think they ride their bikes to school. I just see them. They just bike around.
Well, I know. I was just curious if that's how kids got to school.
The most biking you'll see in Sandy from living here is on probably the Tickle Creek Trail or DeBarco Road, because that is relatively flat compared to the rest of the town.
Did people take DeBarco as kind of I guess it's a lower volume, low speed option than some others?
I don't think there's a ton. I don't think it's a big biking community because of the topography and because of all the rain we get. There are a lot of people walking though, so I guess the rain doesn't bug people walking.
Yeah. It bothers me because I know a lot of people want to ride the bikes, but I think their Sandy Ridge is just up the road a little bit here where people do a lot of the off-road kind of biking things. And then of course you got Mount Hood National Forest, but there are people like myself and my wife who would love to have, the fat tires, real low geared, just for exercise. Would love to be able to have circles and places. I think the master plan has several bike routes on the plan, but it's really difficult right now to get from place to place with a bike.
Yeah, the Parks Plan has a pretty robust proposed trail system that we'll be incorporating, so that'll be part of it. Oh, Annie raised her hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's right where I was headed, and that I would love to see Sandy. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I would love to see Sandy find a way to add some of those trails, because transit gets a lot of bikes. We have a lot of people who take their bikes on transit to ride at Sandy Ridge Trail. You see Mount Hood Express carries bike trailers. It's a huge community and it's right in our neighborhood. So if we could find a way to capture those riders in town, it'd be great.
Oh, hold on, a bunch of hands came up at once. And okay, Jerry raised his hand, and then I think Don was first, though. You might have beat him by a millisecond, Don. But go ahead, Don.
Okay, I'll just be really brief. You know, the topography along 211 is ridiculous for biking. I mean, it's tough, but there are people that like those challenges, and the pinch points along there are horrific. Whether you're on a bike or on foot, it's absolutely scary being along, 211, and it should be nice to be able to access a little bit more of that. And I know that in our proposed parks, trails, and master plan, there are some bypass trails that are kind of associated with that would allow linkages up to, for instance, the Tickle Creek Greenway without having to go on to 211 to get there from, say, Bornstead area, to get across there. So that would be a nice thing. But yeah, I'd like to make sure that we have some kind of either pedestrian or bicycle access along generally along 211, because it's just hazardous, and people, I think, would utilize those areas. Thanks.
Okay, great comment. I got it. Great, Jerry?
I was just going to kind of echo what Kelly said, that there are different communities of bicyclists, and I would, up until a few months ago, because of a knee problem, I'm and my wife are in the the spandex clip in your pedals crowd, and so you have that group of people, and we would ride through 26 in town and not be too bothered by it, but we're not the family biker, and so it might be helpful to discern, when we talk about making Sandy more bikeable, what crowd are we going after? Is it the spandex crowd, the ones that can handle about anything, or do you want the families? And that may be just a helpful approach, or at least to us in our mind. Who do we want to see doing more biking? And the topography is an issue. We always tell people, when we take off from our driveway, we live on DeBarco, no matter which way we go, we have to go up a hill.
Well, that brings me back a little bit to the goals that we talked about before. Perhaps we need a goal that talks about, supporting family-friendly bike routes, or, versus, like you just said, Jerry, where, a lot of people in the spandex crowd are really comfortable on about anything, and they're really fit. But either family friendly, or, sometimes we describe it as we want to encourage biking for those that are interested but hesitant, which I think is a lot of people. Most houses have bikes, and people just don't use them because they're interested, but the facilities and the comfort just aren't there. So we could play with the goals a little bit too, to make sure that we're addressing what you just said. I think that would be good. Because you're right, different projects are going to be for different users. All right, good comments. Anything else on biking? No? All right, keep moving. The next section's transit. So we did document the fixed routes that are out today. Just a little bit about the frequency and the location of the stops, a little bit about ridership data, what we had, and where there are either good or poor connections to the system, and also a brief description of the dial ride and paratransit that is offered. And then the map's pretty basic. It's just the routes and the stops. And a lot of the information, Andy, we did pull from their most recent master plan. So we didn't dig in too deep, just because you guys have that. And I know you probably haven't had a chance to read through it. So I don't know if you have any comments, or if there's anything you thought was important that we had left out, or if you want to give us comments in the future, that's totally fine too.
Yeah, thank you. I just read through it at the beginning of this meeting, and there are some changes. So back to Kelly's question, our master plan was adopted in April, so we do have some changes that have already taken place. And I don't know if you want to leave them in here, such as the dial-a-ride. We've already gotten a new software system that's computer-aided dispatch to try and help our dial-a-ride, but it's okay to leave it in there because our dial-a-ride is a heavily used system. We do, we still could look at adding another driver and vehicle. So
There's still need. Okay.
there's still a need. So yeah, some of that. And then we've also rebranded Star is now called Sam Rides. To bring it better aligned with the entire system. And so I'll send you my comments. There's also a proposed route to Clackamas Town Center that we'll probably implement in the next couple of years. So yeah, I'll just send you mine if you don't mind.
Yeah, that's great. No, I'm happy to update it. Honestly, a lot of this we wrote back in March and April and it hadn't happened yet. That's just what happens when it takes a while to get through documents, but I would like to, because a lot of this will be carried over into the TSP language that goes forward. So I'd like to get it as close as possible to what's current. So yeah, we're happy to make the changes and make it right. So just let me know.
Okay. I also will send some comments to the wording of the goals. I want to make sure that the state just put out the vision around the mountain plan. So I want to be sure that some of the goals in the vision around the mountain are included here, or at least are, reflective of one another.
No, that sounds good.
I'll send you all that.
Yeah. Happy to add anything transit you like.
Thank you.
Okay, sure, sounds good. So just in general, do you guys have a sense of the transit system? I don't know how often you use the system or know people that do. Is it for commuting, recreation, those that just don't have a driver's license? I'm just curious your guys' overall sense of the users of the system.
Do you want my overall
sense? I know you know the answer, so maybe we'll see if anybody else
that's
the answer.
Probably a good
You can tell them if they're correct or not. And maybe nobody knows. I don't know.
Well, I can say.
Sorry, Carl, go ahead.
I was just going to put my hand up. Be a good boy. Anyway, one of the concerns that I have with transit, and it's on again, off again, has been the relationship to homeless people using the transit system from Gresham up into our community, and how that all interacts with crime, difficulty in finding housing, what to do with people who need different facilities and that kind of thing. So there is some concern there. I don't ride the Sandy to Gresham route very often, so I'm not sure just how much use it used to be. We used to have it free, and we decided to add some pay to be able to restrict that, but people can come up with the kind of money to get out of Gresham. And I think there's a lot of unknowns about how much that influences that part of our community.
Cool. Good comment. Go ahead.
So my guess with who's riding is I have seen, people park at Centennial Plaza. So there's obviously people who do have driver's license that are riding it. I've had the pleasure the last 2 years of riding the trolley around town and handing out ice cream for Sandy Helping Hands. And a lot of what we saw there are some of the same people I see in the downtown area. So I think and one of them happens to be a neighbor of mine. So I know that they're ones who don't have a driver's license, can't get around, So I think that's helpful for them. I also have a teenager who just got her license on Monday. But prior to that, they use transit a lot around town and, would go into Gresham occasionally with it. And her friends were too. So I don't know. I'm almost seeing kind of a mixed bag. We do have some chamber members that have work in Portland and they'll take it into Portland or into Gresham and then, hop Max and take it into Portland and that too. So I don't know. My guess is probably more of a mixed bag of people riding. I guess it depends on which whether it's the trolley, the shopper shuttle, or, you know, going into Gresham or just around town. I guess maybe that's the big difference on who's doing it.
Good. I got all those notes. Is that okay, Andy? Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I have been here for about 8 years and been trying to address that. It brings homeless and crime perspective. When I started here, we were fareless, and in 2013 did start charging a fare. And my understanding at the time, I believe there was a large group of people at the time who did come in from Gresham, because there were a lot more churches who did free meals throughout the week. And so they would come in and hit those free meals, is my understanding. I don't really know how to dispel that rumor, because I think most of our homeless in town are local. They might use SAM to get around, but SAM is not necessarily bringing them here from somewhere else. I've met with the police about it, who concur and have kind of the same understanding about who our homeless are and where they come from. So I need to do a better job, I think, of addressing that aspect. And I do think that when we started charging a fare, things maybe did change a little bit. And that was, again, when I started here. So maybe what I see now is not necessarily what Carl saw prior. But yes, Chris is absolutely right. So our shopper shuttle does have a very high elderly and disabled population who use it to get to the shopping. They do their shopping with it, and it's actually become kind of it's really cute. It's like a social hour for all of them. It's great. But our main, like 80% of our ridership is the Sam Gresham, and they are commuters. So yeah, it is different according to the route, but the bulk of our ridership are commuters, and then I'd say recreation.
Okay.
I was gonna say I've taken Sam to the blue line to the red line to the airport twice, and I know a few other people in Sandy that have now done it as well. If I'm going with my kids and my spouse, we take a car, but a few times I've traveled by myself. And in the last 5 years, and I've actually taken Sam to the blue line to the red line and then reversed that when I come back to Portland. So I don't even have to take my car to the airport, and it costs like a couple bucks. You don't have long-term parking or anything like that at the airport. So it saves you some money as well.
Yeah. And now that Mount Hood Express goes all the way to Timberline Lodge, we see a lot more of that coming from the airport, especially from other countries that are used to using public transit more than vehicles, and they don't necessarily get here and rent a car. So we've seen a lot with the expansion of Mount Hood Express that are coming from the airport and then back to the airport.
Okay, that's great. Hold on, I don't think we mentioned that.
Yeah, if you have a few drinks on your flight, then you don't have to worry about driving when you get back.
Carl raises his hand.
Yeah, just out of curious thinking to ourselves and to myself is that, you know, with transit, I've always thought that transit had one of its goals as reducing the number of vehicles on the highways and our congestion issues. And my observation, and maybe this is wrong, Andy, but it probably doesn't reduce the number of vehicles on our system significantly at all. And it's more of a service that we use for people who don't want to drive or can't drive or want to use the system for different reasons, much like what Kelly is talking about. But to reduce the number of vehicles probably doesn't do that very much, or at least significantly anyway.
Transit is considered one of the ways to reduce traffic. And I know that the Mount Hood Express system came out of the multimodal plan for the safety corridor for that purpose, to take the recreational users that are headed to the mountain, off of our highway. And they do a really good job of it. Some of them do get on Sam and Gresham, connect with Mount Hood Express here, but we do still have a lot of people who drive here and then get on the vehicle to go to the mountain rather than getting on in Gresham. So yes, we do take some cars off the road, and that is a goal of transit for sure. You're right. There probably could be more. And yes, our highest ridership, of course, was, you know, around 2008 when people were really using SAM to get to the community college, and they didn't want to pay $4, you know, a gallon in gas and things of that nature. It also depends on where you're headed and where our bus stops are. So when the high school was closer to the highway, we had a lot of high schoolers that would hop on. That dropped off a little bit when the high school moved further back, things like that. But it does take a certain percentage, but it can't be counted on to get people completely out of their cars.
Sure. And my guess is if you get the $4 a gallon gas, you might get some more people. And if we get to $5, certainly more folks. But we're headed that way, it sounds like.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, that was a good discussion on transit. Let's keep moving along. It's already 4:15. I want to make sure we make it through the motor vehicle piece, which is next. And that's usually, you know, the bulk of our work and analysis goes, since no surprise, but the primary way that people get around Sandy is driving. So the memo walks through what we call functional classification. And if you're not familiar with that, I'll give you a 2-second version, but all the roads in towns are classified based on how they serve the system, going all the way from the top with the freeway, you know, US 26 going through. It's the highway, and it's also a major arterial. 211 is also an arterial, and this is shown on map. Page 11, figure 4. So if you have that, you can see where the major roadways are. Actually, 26 is the only major roadway. And then 211 and Bluff and some of the other roads are more of a minor. And then you step down even from that to collectors, which are a lower classification. And then below that is what's really remaining are all of what we call local streets. And the way the classifications really matter is that sets the cross-section of the road. You know, you can go to the city standards and it'll tell you what a new collector or a new arterial or a new local street would look like. How many, you know, how wide are the lanes? Are the sidewalks curb tight or separated? What is, you know, what are the bike lane requirements? What does the landscape strip look like? All of those design elements are defined by what the roadway classification is. And then there are also a lot of other standards, access spacing standards, like how frequent can the driveways be? Typically, you want them spaced very far apart or even somewhat restricted on the higher classifications, like the highway and the arterials. And then as you step down to minor arterials and collectors, driveways can be more frequent or intersections can be more frequent. Someone earlier brought up traffic calming. That's very much related to classification. We would never put speed bumps on US 26. That is one of the reasons it is a major arterial. I know, can you imagine? But of course, traffic circles may be appropriate on collectors, but you then still wouldn't put speed bumps. But then when you get to a local street, almost all of the traffic calming elements would be appropriate because, you know, they're a low volume, low speed road. So it really kind of sets the framework for different types of facilities and helps us plan and design what would be appropriate for them because of the classification. So does that make sense to everybody? Okay. And Kelly, I know you had made a comment that the functional classifications that were shown from the 2011 TSP is outdated.
Yeah, we had Village Boulevard and Cascada Village Drive even back then, and I don't know why they weren't shown in the existing conditions plan.
Well, has the TSP been amended for those, or were they separate like decisions?
They were shown in the future. They were shown in the. I don't know. I think it's just an error. I don't think that was done appropriately in the last two. I don't think it was caught. So there's a few streets in here that if you look at the proposed roadway classifications, the streets already existed, a few of them even in 2011 when that document was adopted. and so it should have been shown as an existing condition. Well, and now those roads have even been further extended and improved. So there's definitely some issues with that map.
Okay, so I'll work with you and we'll figure it out. We were just showing what was in the current at TSP. I guess I had not known that there was some errors.
The other odd one is that Davis Street is shown as a collector and not McCormick.
Oh.
And in the existing conditions, it shows Davis Street as a collector and McCormick not as a collector. And then in the proposed roadway improvements, it shows McCormick as a collector and Davis Street as a local. But there's nothing that will trigger the modifications to those streets. So I think they need to be consistent on the two maps.
Yes,
so anyway, I can work with you directly on some of these. But
that sounds good.
Just to note, I think it's worthwhile for the group here that there are a few errors on that existing condition.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up, just in case they know. Yeah, so I'll work with you and get that cleaned up. I didn't realize that some of those were different. And let's see, sorry, I'm just walking through the memo. On the next page, we have a very, very small section. We just mentioned freight. US 26 is an Oregon freight route reduction review route, which is just a very fancy way of saying that if we ever made it narrower or made it, and it's like the envelope, like if you can picture an area of space like that, a big truck that would go through both width and height, we are not allowed to make it smaller without going through a process with ODOT. But we're not planning on doing that with the TSP that I'm aware of, but it is something that we need to consider. But there's already quite a few like raised medians through downtown or near downtown and the width like through downtown with the on-street parking that I'd be surprised. I don't know, Seth, if you have thoughts, if we recommended anything that would be even narrower than that. I mean, downtown's quite the pinch point between parked cars on both sides and 2 lanes. And so I don't think it'll be an issue for this. It's just something, that we noted in here. And then really just brief about rail. You have no passenger or freight rail. We mentioned the airports, which are not a big part of this study. And then we also mentioned waterway just because we're supposed to, but as you know, nobody gets around Sandy via waterway. You don't have navigable waters to get around. So, all right, go ahead, Carl.
Just curious about the signaling aspects of 26 through city. And I'm just wondering, I know we've had several upgrades of it just recently. I understand there's been an upgrade of it. Do we push through a certain level of, and I don't need an explanation of it at this point, but do we push for a certain level of timing through the city because it is a freightway zone versus, the side street kinds of things? I know there's always been a balance conversation. I won't call it an argument, but a conversation about how long the side streets have to wait before the highway traffic flows through. But I know that ODOT is pretty adamant that we get traffic through Sandy as quick as possible. So do we have a certain level that describes that?
Well, I do know, and Seth, you tell me or Kelly and fill it in, but yeah, it hasn't been that long since the timing was updated, right, on 26 through town.
Very recently, I understand.
Yeah, and we are reflecting the current timings as I get further in the memo and we show like how all the traffic signals are operating. It's with all that new timing. One thing that we will do is when we go look at the future 2040 conditions with, all the growth and future traffic volumes, we may make a recommendation that there's been enough growth on the highway that we want the retiming of signals to be a new project, because we may be able to tell that, even though it was done recently, it will become out of date with 10 or 20 years of growth. I mean, typically with growth, you do want to have your corridors retimed every 5 or 10 years just to make sure that you are optimizing the system, right? You have all this expensive software and infrastructure. It's very cost effective to have the traffic engineers come out and tweak it and make sure, you might get like 5% more throughput on those busy weekends. And, that means the world to you guys. So it is something that we'll take a look at. And it likely, in most TSPs, it's likely a project, something we'd want ODOT to do in the future. And right, it's their signals, they have to pay for it. So
I know the only conversation that exceeds the number of times it comes up over the signaling issues is the sign code. So it's one of those things that I know we talk about a lot.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. So then, yes, we did go ahead and look at how the motor vehicle system was operating. We had, and I'm on page 13, table 2, we had quite a few intersections that we looked at in detail. It definitely includes all the signals that are in town. And then there's also quite a few two-way or stop sign controlled intersections too, especially along like 211, DeBarco, Langen's End. And we actually added the Vista Loop Drive East intersection, and the west one's in there as well. And really, we're just trying to see, you know, how is traffic moving today? How are these intersections doing? You know, are we seeing long delays? And really looking at that table, the only one that does not meet the target that we would like to see is Oriented at 26. And it's still somewhat under full capacity, but it still has some fairly long delays. And I will add that we are looking at like an average weekday condition. I mean, I drive through Sandy a lot. I know you wouldn't believe me if I told you all the intersections work, but going at Orient. But this does not reflect like a great Saturday ski day afternoon or like a Memorial Day weekend where I know you guys had horrible traffic. I was stuck in it. Yeah, these are just average weekday conditions. That's at least what we look at. And they're adjusted a bit for a seasonal factor, but it won't reflect the worst of the worst. Let's see. So if I keep going through here, we did a pretty detailed evaluation of available safety data. So we went back 2014 through the year 2018. And that may seem old, but you would be surprised. It actually takes a year or two for collision data that's collected to be refined and then available for us to look at. So 2018 is still the most recent that is available. They've, I think in draft form, put out half of 2019 recently. So that's why it might seem a little bit old, but that's the best that we have access to. But we looked pretty detailed at all of US 26, and a lot of this got pulled into the bypass study. And then we also looked at all of those study intersections as well. So there's a bunch of details in here if you guys are interested and want to read through it. But I think what's the most interesting is looking at figure 5. It's much easier, at least for me visually, to just look. So this shows over those 5 years where all the fatalities have been, then serious injury, minor injury, and then a possible injury. And you can see where all the collisions were. And there have been a few fatalities. And I know, Kelly, we've talked about them a bit. I believe one was driving, but I think 2 or 3 were pedestrians crossing the highway. And I want to say either not at a signal or a marked crossing, or they were at the signal, but they were not crossing like with the walk. I don't know, Kelly, if you remember some of the background, but they were also like late and people not behaving well. Poor behavior, I would say.
Yeah, I know at least 2 of the pedestrian fatalities, I believe, involve too much consumption of alcohol. I think it's summarized up there on 2 pages before that.
Oh yeah, let's see.
Yeah, 4 pedestrians were killed. I think alcohol was involved in at least a couple of those. Yeah. And then one of them was somebody just like, I think, running across the road to the east of the crosswalk at Rubin and the highway and got struck.
Oh yeah, I have that there.
And then I think it was just one non-pedestrian fatality. It's 2 pages before the map. That has the 5 collisions with a fatality.
Yeah, 4 involved a pedestrian. Alcohol was involved. They were all occurred during low light locations. Yeah, so 2 were at Rubin.
The one at Beers and Hood Street, which is the only one not on the highway, that actually, according to the police department, involved a pedestrian that was inebriated and a driver that was inebriated. So it was like a very bad combination of both the pedestrian and the driver, from my understanding at least. Because that is a really odd place for a pedestrian fatality because it's 2 local streets crossing right there. And then the other 4 are all on the highway, along the highway.
I'm surprised we didn't talk about, and maybe it's in here someplace, but I can't see it, the University and 26, where we've had to establish a safety zone in the center of the highway for people to get to and feel safe before they run across to get to the transit station. Used to be there was a lot of stuff going on there, but I guess it must have slowed down.
Yeah, I was
There
gonna,
was
oh,
I was
the
going to say
data didn't-
there's a serious injury there, but it was actually
Quite a while ago, I think.
oh, I just mean in this document there is one there, but it was 2 vehicles that hit each other.
Oh,
It's the 4th bullet point under 8 collisions with a serious injury.
got it. I see it. Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think that was like in the mid to late 2000s, Carl, wasn't it?
It's been quite a while back. I remember it happening, and I remember that people all talked about what to do, because that is a kind of a push for people to come from the university. There's a lot of housing down to the south of the city of 26, trying to get to the transit center or maybe to some other, like the high school and that kind of stuff. So I think it's helped a bunch to have that safety concrete zone in the middle of the highway. I see people standing there. Makes me nervous, but at least they've got concrete curb between them and a Mack truck.
Yeah, I was going to send in my notes that the transit master plan does identify crosswalks at the transit center, specifically from City Hall to the transit center, and on the other side as well for that reason. Just pedestrians trying to get to that Centennial Plaza across the road.
Yeah, I mean, we find transit stops have to be almost the #1 generator of crossings just because you have to either to get on or get off. You can't just stay on your side of the road. And yeah, there's so many pedestrian crossings just near transit stops, or the need for them.
Right.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sandy. I'd appreciate you adding that comment. I did also want to add too, there are 3 intersections that are on the statewide safety priority index system. We call it the SPIS. But intersections that are in the top 10th percentile statewide as having, safety issues, and that's 26 and Orient at 362nd, and then at Reuben as well. So those are ones that have been identified statewide, and ones that we'll be looking at to see if there's any, projects or solutions that we can provide to help those locations.
I'm surprised that Bluff hasn't been identified as an issue, because you have that visual blind spot that you're coming from the south. You got to come up. You can't always see the cars if you're parked on the other side. And then also the same sort of scenario on Wolf, where you got to come up what I call Post Office Hill, where you really can't see a lot of traffic there. And then across the street stuff going into 7-Eleven and that same Wolf Tenike intersection. It's interesting that those haven't been identified on your SPIS format.
Yeah, well, to be a 10th percentile state identified location is pretty bad. I mean, those are the top of the top of the top within the state. But I don't know. So the data we looked, citywide, didn't show any at least reported accidents. So the answer could be there's collisions, but they didn't file a report and call the police. If you don't, we have no record of it happening. And you'd be surprised how many meetings I go to like this, and people are like, I know there was an accident. I saw it, 2 years ago, and it just doesn't get reported.
I have another theory. I think that the intersections are bad enough that people accommodate that, and they make more space, they slow down more, they both ways. Everybody knows that there's an issue, I think. At least I do on those 2 other locations, but certainly there's problems at Orient, 362nd, and Reuben.
All right, good feedback. Thanks. And then we also did go through and do what we calculate it. It's called a critical crash rate. Just so we're not only looking at the data, you know, with itself, but also comparing it to, you know, how busy the location is. It's not fair, right, to compare 10 accidents at 2 local streets versus 10 accidents at 2 like arterials. You would expect it to be higher. So we factor that in a bit. And then we also compare it to other similar types of facilities to see if they're, you know, higher than expected. And that's on the top of page 17. And the 2 that really got flagged from that analysis were 26 at 362nd. And as you know, that's going to become a 4-legged intersection with the north leg extending. And then also it identified 211 at DeBarco. So those are 2 locations we'll look at as well and make sure, like I said, moving forward, are there any sort of projects or solutions or things that we want to make sure we get in the TSP so we can start, you know, bringing those collisions down there.
One thing that just occurred to me, I don't know why it didn't occur to me sooner, but we just had a Safe Routes to School plan that we did last year in 2020. Have you looked at the data from that? That has additional pedestrian incidents that for whatever reason, I don't think are being reported here.
Do we have a copy of it? I guess I don't know.
I can send you a link to it. It's on our website. We did it with
Oh.
Alta Planning Group. I don't know why it just occurred to me.
That would be great. Yeah, I'd be happy to go. We can read through it and yeah, just incorporate it with what we have.
It has a lot of pedestrian projects prioritized already.
Yeah, that would be good. And honestly, so if they must have some goals and.
They do, yeah.
Okay, well, let's look at those too. Is that an adopted plan, Kelly?
It is. Yeah, and it's on our website. It's adopted in February 2020, I believe.
Okay, so then I would ask, should we have our own Safe Routes to School goal section?
Yes.
Does that sound good? Okay, we could just grab all of their goals and then we'll just copy them over and it'll be its own section within the TSP. Okay, good. No, I love the consistency. I think that's important. Go ahead, Carl.
Just a statement for possibility of investigating information. The DeBarco and 211, that was repaired by ODOT, what, 6-7 years ago, something like that, because it was one of the worst intersections in the state or whatever classification it was. It's curious to me that it didn't come down and become more safer. I think I agree with the fact that it's an unsafe crossing for a bunch of different reasons. But it's curious to me that ODOT spent that money in there and it didn't bring it down in its own classification, just kept it up high like that.
Well, do we know when it was improved? I mean, the data is 2014 to 2018. I wonder if there's some pre-construction.
It was in that time period.
Okay.
I don't have the time in it, but it can't be 10 years old. It's got to be
It's not
5-6 years, something like that. But they spent several $1 million, not 10 million, but several.
Yeah, I can see it's realigned on the east side and a little bit of a curve. Try to make it a little more aligned.
Yeah, I think it was $2.5 million project, I believe.
Just curious that they fixed it and then it still stays and remains one of the worst intersections.
Yeah, I'm going to make a note of it. I'll go look and see if it's before or after the improvements. That would be interesting.
I agree with the assessment that it is a dangerous intersection, but curious that ODOT spent that money and it still remains there.
Well, it's just two-way stop controlled still, right? Yeah.
There's stop signs on both sides of DeBarco and
211.
people are supposed to travel 45 through there, but trucks are barreling around that south side and trying to make speed to get up that hill.
I don't know. We've had recommendations before we took over jurisdiction of Highway 211 that it needs to be changed to a 4-way stop, but I don't know how possible that is because under icy conditions, I don't think trucks are going to be able to stop coming downhill, and I don't think they're going to be able to start again going uphill if they stop there. I think it's too steep.
Yeah, and just behind this, just to the south of this intersection, is that pedestrian and a bike path. We put, in my mind, one of the most dangerous locations that's across Tickle Creek. So it's kind of a nasty little piece of road.
I I think there was also a recommendation at one point to do a roundabout there or something.
Yeah, and also some crossings for pedestrians. I think Dawn brought it up earlier to get people off of the highway.
Hmm. All right, yeah, I'll definitely take a look and see. Yeah, and I'm curious what's in I'm guessing there's no project now since it's been improved
Right.
in the TSP, so, okay. And with that, at the end of the memo, there's just a summary of everything that we just went through for each of the modes and just kind of the high level look at everything. But is there anything else you guys want to add or talk about transportation wise that we haven't hit on yet? Sorry, and the sun's coming out and hitting me. No? All right, Kelly or Seth, do you guys have anything else that you want to add? If not, I can start talking about what the next steps are and what's coming.
I don't have anything else.
No?
There is a complexity happening out there on Vista Loop with the developments that are happening on north and south of the highway. Another DeBarco crossing into Vista Loop west and all that, and then how that all is going to be occurring. And I know that they spend a lot of money and time on Vista Loop East to get that development up and running and being able to establish. So I think there's a bunch of conversation from a lot of us locals. I happen to live very close to that, about the highway speed being around 60 and 70 miles an hour in that 45-mile speed limit, and people pulling out now at DeBarco and Vista Loop East, and also Langenstand. It's surprisingly not as many accidents there as some other locations.
Yeah, I know when even at the very beginning of even scoping this project, Kelly, you had brought up just speeding issues in general out there. And it's not part of this scope to do like a detailed speed analysis out there, but it could be that the TSP recommends the need for a corridor speed study out there. The rules on how the state sets speed limits has changed over the last year or so. It used to just be, we threw out, tubes. I'm sure you've seen them on the road. We found out how fast people were going, did some calculations, and then the speed had to be within a certain percentage of the profile of how everybody was already driving. So if everybody was speeding, then we kind of set the speed limit fairly high. But now there's a lot more flexibility. I believe the state is allowed to post it at the average, and then if there's justification, even go a bit lower. I don't know ODOT's appetite for how low they'd want to go. It has to obviously be realistic. We can't just post it at 35 because no one's going to go that fast. But I know wasn't there a motorcycle fatality at Shorty's Corner just like a month or two ago, which was also, it's really sad. So there's documented issues out here. And so like I said, that could be the TSP may have a project to do the study. I mean, I'll have to talk to Seth and Kelly a little bit more about it, but we know we've been hearing that from some people.
All you have to do is measure the speed on a Friday afternoon and a Sunday night, and it's 0. It was backed up.
See,
west.
So congestion is great for safety. That's what I heard you say, right?
Yeah, I think we had talked about a recommendation that a speed zone investigation be done to the east of downtown out to the edge of the UGB. Yeah. And then I have an idea to do another one in the couplet because I want to see that drop by 5 miles an hour too. So I think there'll be 2 speed zone investigation recommendations coming out of this at least.
Okay, that'd be great. And then Kelly knows everything about all the developer shenanigans and things I know that are happening at the Vista Loops, and he's keeping us informed. So whatever comes out of that, we'll just make sure that we're reflecting those decisions that come through those applications. I don't know, Kelly, if shenanigans is the right word, but
hurdles, I would say.
Okay, so hurdles. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks everyone. This is a great discussion. So yeah, how about the next 2 weeks, if you want to mark some stuff up and send Kelly some comments, that'd be great. And then he can pass them along to me. I know Kelly's already provided some comments today. Andy's going to provide some as well. And then we will revise this memo and get that updated and back to you. So our next steps are, we are preparing that financial forecast. So we know how much money is going to be available to spend once we have our shopping list of projects. And then we'll have the future conditions memo. So it's similar to what you just went through, but it'll include all the expected operations and deficiencies that we think will be in Sandy in the year 2040. So it'll include all the growth, all the future traffic volumes, all the congestion that we're expecting, and then incorporating a lot of the things Kelly brought up about new developments and projects that we know are going to happen by then. We'll show those. And then we can look at what we think those deficiencies and gaps are going to be in the future. And I'm thinking that could all happen pretty fast. So we could have CAC, and we need to stay on schedule. I already know what Seth's thinking. In the fall, I think it would be in the next probably 6 weeks. We could have that all through, and then after CAC 3, we actually start working on the project list with prioritization and deciding what are we going to spend that money on? What, like I said, 20 or 30% of the projects will be prioritized, and we'll show them as reasonably funded, and then everything else that just stays on the aspirational list. We'll want to get your guys' input on that as well. So those are the next steps, and then we move into the draft TSP by December 17th. That's our plan. So any questions on that? No? Okay, well, it's 4:45, so thanks, guys. That was a, yeah.
I'll just add one little thing, is I'll be sending out another poll with potential dates again, just like we did this last time. And then we'll do the same thing that we did for today, is just select the date with the most availability for people.
Yeah, and I know August is tough.
Unfortunately. Yes.
August is tough. So I would expect to get, a lot more people at the next meeting. No one has plans in the fall.
You should have seen our planning commission participation last night. Jerry can attest to that. We had 3 public hearings, and I don't think any public comments, right, Jerry?
That's perfect. Keep it easy.
I see a strategy.
Yeah, wait for the complex decisions happen in the summer. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time. It was a great discussion. This was tons of great local feedback for me. All right. Thanks everyone. Enjoy your
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye-bye.